Hello and welcome to Sunday Politics. This week, assisted dying in England and Wales could move a step closer to being legalised. With similar legislation proposed in Scotland and the Republic, what are the attitudes to it here?
Somebody needs to just stand up and address it, We're in the modern world now, things need to be addressed. Stop hiding.
Wherever across the globe that this has been legislated for, we do see that the qualification for the procedure widens. Inevitably it widens.
Plus, as the Infrastructure Minister declares Northern Ireland water fit for purpose, we hear from two people involved in the provision of housing who claim the state of our wastewater system is holding up developments right across the country. And with his thoughts on all of that and more, I'm joined by the Northern Ireland editor of the Belfast Telegraph and Sunday Independent, Sam McBride. It's a hugely emotive issue and one which is potentially moving much closer to home. Assisted dying is one of the big stories this week as MPs prepare to vote on changing the legislation in England and Wales. In the Republic, the general election campaign has pressed the pause button on attempts to do the same thing there. But what's the mood for change here in Northern Ireland? Faye Kidd has been investigating.
Should you be able to choose when you die? Current laws throughout the UK prevent people from asking for medical help to end their life. Assisting someone to take their own life is illegal and is punishable for up to 14 years in prison. Assisted dying is a devolved issue, meaning it's up to elected politicians whether they want to change the law or not at the Assembly. But over the water and in the Republic of Ireland, moves have started by some politicians to legalise assisted dying. So should the conversation begin in Northern Ireland too?
You look back at those and you think what's happened in the last year. You know what I mean?
We visited Jill and mum Carol in their family home in Larne. Their much-loved dad and husband Derek passed away in 2019. So Jill, tell me a bit about your dad. What was he like?
He was funny, he was active, he was a very vibrant man and just loved being around people. And he just changed slowly from this vibrant big man, full of fun, to, in his last days, lying like a corpse in there, didn't want to get out of bed, couldn't get out of bed. If he was 5 stone, that's what he was, just very sad to watch. My dad originally, if I had have asked him then, would you want assisted dying or anything along those lines, he would have said absolutely. We used to laugh and joke that there's the slipway down here, and he said, if I don't ever put me in a nursing home or don't ever, allow me to be a burden to you, put me in a wheelchair and push me down into the sea.
MPs will vote on Labour backbencher Kim Leadbeater's bill on the 29th of November. It's for England and Wales. North of the border, MSPs will vote on Lib Dem Liam MacArthur's bill at stage 1. And in the Republic of Ireland, TDs are likely to vote on a bill in the next Dáil. There are clearly geographical differences, but what's the difference of opinion here? Gavin Walker from My Death, My Decision has been campaigning on the issue since April.
We did a poll last August with Lucid Talk, and the results of that poll showed that 67% of people in Northern Ireland, that's 2/3 of the people who live here, are very keen to see an assisted dying bill brought here. Obviously with all the protections for folks as well, but nevertheless they want to have the conversation. They want to see politicians getting involved with this issue. It's happening everywhere else and they don't understand why it's not happening here in Northern Ireland.
And if a bill was to be brought forward in Stormont, would you want it to be the same as the Westminster bill?
No. There are some issues of the Westminster bill that are brilliant and give all the protections that people would want. But I think the important thing is that the bill at Westminster, the bill in Scotland, the Isle of Man, Jersey, the Republic of Ireland, they're all that little bit different because they all reflect the issues and the concerns that the local community have. So until we have the discussion ourselves, we won't know exactly what we're happy with. And that's the important thing, that the bill reflects what the people of Northern Ireland want to have.
Tim Cairns is the Senior Policy Advisor at the Christian Action Research and Education Group, or CARE. They are anti an assisted dying bill.
Wherever across the globe that this has been legislated for, we do see that the qualification for the procedure widens. Inevitably it widens from very narrowly defined terminal illnesses. It always moves to mental illness, to disabilities. And I think that what we have to say is, look, do we value life or do we not? Look, we're all going to come to the end of our lives at some point in time, and none of us want to suffer. I don't want to see anybody suffer. I don't want to see any of my relatives suffer. But I think we need to make a choice. Do we want to institute better palliative care and fund that, or do we want to go another way and make another choice?
There's no sign of a vote taking place here anytime soon, but we asked the main political parties where they stood on the issue. The responses ranged from it's a conscience issue, on the fence, to strongly against a bill here. But there's one politician who is in favour. That's People Before Profit's Jerry Carroll.
Well, certainly, I mean, I know a lot of people have concerns about it, but I think really what we're talking about is having a healthcare system that obviously supports people.
Do you accept that there's currently no pathway to deliver a bill at Stormont?
I mean, it seems that way. I mean, obviously, if the Department of Health had a change of mind, they could, but it seems to be that, you know, the current minister and the current department aren't willing to act on this and other issues that are important of health. So I think there's certainly a change in conversation. I think the polls here show that, you know, there's a broad support for some sort of assisted dying. Obviously, there's differences on what that looks like, but I think the duty is on the department to lead the conversation.
Would you support people from the north travelling to the south to access assisted dying?
And if it does go through, and I know they've obviously talked about safeguarding in the committee and different aspects, and we would certainly support people in the north getting those services in the south.
So you're happy for people from the north to travel to the south, but you and your party don't want to introduce a bill in Northern Ireland?
No, we're saying the Department of Health should bring forward a bill.
As it stands, people are travelling to countries outside the UK and Ireland to access assisted dying. If bills start to pass in parliaments here, other options could become available. But for families like Jill's, the conversation may be close to home, but it's too far from Stormont. And do you think it would have made a difference if assisted dying was legal in Northern Ireland? Was that something you would have explored?
Absolutely, 100%. Like I wouldn't want my family to have to look after me the way we did with Dad, and not because we didn't want to do it, because it just took everything from him. Somebody needs to just stand up and address it, you know. We're in the modern world now, you know, things need to be addressed. Stop hiding and stop brushing things under the carpet in the hope that somebody else will pick it up 5 years later.
Jill Crawford ending that report from Faye Kidd, and the Belfast Telegraph's Sam Bride is with me now. Sam, this vote at Westminster on Friday will undoubtedly attract huge attention.
It will, and I think we often give politicians a hard time about how they deal with some of these issues. I've been surprised and impressed with how politicians in Westminster have grappled with this. This is the most profound decision that any politician will take. It's very easy to see how a politician would think, how will this play for me electorally? How will this play for me within my party, with my colleagues? We've seen cabinet ministers on both sides speaking out about this. We've seen Wes Streeting, who's the health secretary, saying he has serious concerns about it. He's actually fully opposed to it. And we've seen people who are in support of assisted dying in principle, saying that they're against this bill because they think there are particular issues with this. That to me is impressive. That's what politicians should do. And if we ever get to this, which I think we will get to probably quite quickly in Northern Ireland, I hope that we approach it in the same way, not the sort of tribal, simplistic party politicking, but actually saying this is an issue which impacts all of us and our friends and our relatives. We need to get it right.
The Northern Ireland parties, of course, have a vote in Westminster, even though the proposed legislation would only apply to England and Wales. Faye referenced the range of views there. It's worth detailing them here now. The DUP is against and has proposed a motion in the Assembly, so all 5 MPs will be voting against the Kim-led Beater bill. The TUV is against. Jim Allister will be voting against the bill. For the Ulster Unionists, it's a conscience issue, though Robin Swan will be voting against. It's a conscience issue for Alliance. Saoirse Eastwood's indicated that she'll be voting against. The SDLP, Colm Eastwood and Claire Hanna are still considering the bill. That it is a conscience issue for the party, although the party did say earlier this year it's open to a change in the law, but that comes with a lot of caveats and conditions. And Sinn Féin also said similar in terms of a degree of support in principle, though obviously it won't be voting in Westminster. And finally, the independent unionist Alex Easton is voting against. So the parties are very divided on the issue, not surprisingly.
Yeah, and look, it'll not surprise people that the DUP and TUV are against. But I think that the reality of this is that any party is going to have people, probably at some level, they might not be elected, who are in favour and who are against. And so when you try to whip people on an issue of this fundamental significance, we've seen how Sinn Féin have lost people over things like abortion. It doesn't work. And so ultimately, this will come down to conscience, and it will come down to what people think.
OK, Sam, for now, thank you. We'll talk to you again after our final story, which is the well-publicised problems with Northern Ireland water funding, what the company can and can't do, and the huge consequences for all of us. On The View this week, I put two big questions to the Infrastructure Minister, John O'Dowd. The first focused on social housing being completed, but not being made available to tenants because the water infrastructure hasn't been put in place. The second asked if changes should be made to enable NI Water to raise more funding. Here's a flavour of our conversation. In Dungannon, Radius Housing has 29 houses that have been ready for handover since March 2024. Northern Ireland Water hasn't progressed connections. Radius is out £150,000 in lost rent while it's still paying back the loan for building the houses. That's houses that are ready for families that desperately need them, some of them with very particular needs, that can't be used, can't be moved into because Northern Ireland Water can't connect them to the system.
Well, I don't know the case specific, but I do know how the planning system works. And when a planning application is put in, NI Water is one of the consultees, one of the official consultees in a planning application. So before a planning application would be granted and before a builder would go to build, they would know before they laid their first brick as to whether NI Water could connect them to the system, or there was conditions under which NI Water expected them to fulfil at the completion of that construction programme. So no builder would go on site not knowing what NI Water
Not sure that's absolutely right. Not sure that's absolutely right, because some of these... Well, I'm going to give you more examples.
I've worked around the planning system for over 20 years.
There is a serious question about the structure of Northern Ireland Water at the moment. And you will know that there was a call recently in an audit office report for the department to establish a comprehensive review of alternative arrangements for how Northern Ireland Water operates. That's how serious this situation is. Is that something that you are considering?
Well, you see, what the report asked to be done was to carry out a report that has already been done in 2020. So another report in 2024 says, carry out another report into how NI Water is financed. So my view is that would not necessarily be the best use of my department's time at this stage, because the report in 2020 is still relevant. No financial equation has changed since that point. The models that you can look at are all known. And the alternative models, many of them lead to domestic water bills.
John O'Dowd talking to me last Thursday night on The View. Well, I'm joined now in the studio by Seamus Leheny of the Northern Ireland Federation of Housing Associations and Mark Spence of the Construction Employers Federation. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining us today. Seamus Leheny, first of all, the Minister was very clear there. He said before a brick is laid, NIW's conditions are very clear. Is that your understanding as well?
Every housing association, before they put a brick down to build a new house, they agree in principle with Northern Ireland Water about the outcomes that's required to connect those properties to the water and sewage infrastructure. They then get planning permission. I think maybe there's a bit of a problem with planning permission, where it will give approval, and it'll always say at the end in the small print, subject to final connection approval with Northern Ireland Water. So what we have now with schemes, it almost feels like for housing associations, the goalposts are being moved. I'll give you one very good example in Derry, where we have Apex Housing Association commenced work in 2022 on 421 houses in a city that has a waiting list of 6,000 applicants. They were told in 2022 that the sewage connection would be delivered for those 421 houses by November 2025. So that's great. They began work. However, it's now changed, and Northern Ireland Water have now said we cannot actually give you a timeline to connect those houses. But also on top of that, they quoted a price of £8 million for the infrastructure, the pumping stations to facilitate that construction. That cost has now leapt to £15 million. So it's coming down to where they're saying there's a strain on the connectivity with the capacity, but also with a cost pressure as well.
So that's a very interesting example you have given. And when we look back at what the Minister said, there was a clear inference from him that any problem with those projects involving hundreds of homes, and in the case you've just quoted, it's 421 homes in Derry, not being made available to tenants is, in his view, nothing whatsoever to do with NI Water. What is your view in the Federation?
That's got everything to do with Northern Ireland Water. There was a commitment in principle with the association and the developing contractor who are building those homes. Housing association, they rely on, there's a significant proportion of public money goes into building those houses, roughly around about 54%. So there's a duty of care to make sure that those houses can proceed. And what that has done now, it puts that housing association in a precarious position. Do they pause construction? Or do they still build with no timeline for that connection?
So it's very interesting. I want to be absolutely clear, because people will have watched that interview carefully on Thursday night and they'll be very interested to hear what it is precisely that you're saying now in response to the Minister's views. He said he didn't know about the specifics of any of those examples that I quoted to him. You've mentioned one, the Derry Apex project. There were several others I quoted in detail as well. In spite of not knowing the detail, the Minister nevertheless said he felt confident enough to assert very clearly that NI Water would have laid out clear conditions on each of those housing projects before they started. And you're saying that is the case, but that things changed during the build process.
That's it, exactly. There'd be conditions put on the Housing Association for remedial works on the site to help with drainage, etc., like that. They would fulfil that, but it's that external connection. It's getting that scheme connected to the wider network, and that's where basically the goalposts are then moving, where they're simply not given a timeline for delivery, and obviously the impact on costs as well.
And there are quite a few projects that I quoted and that we could talk about in more detail now, but we don't have time. What are the implications for those projects, for the companies involved, and for the potential tenants who are now being told, we thought we would have a house for you at a certain time, and in some cases the house is actually built, but you can't move in?
It's well documented what the waiting list is here. We should be building a minimum 2,000 social homes a year. The year just passed, we built 1,400. The target this year is going to be another 1,400. So we're missing targets of 2,000 a year. And like you said, there's examples in Dungannon where there's homes sitting ready for people to move into, but they can't because they can't get the connection. So. And also, housing associations are charities, so it's not as if they have millions of pounds in reserves where they can offset this or sell the houses a different way. They have to get these houses to obviously get the grant money, the rent to come in and pay back the loan.
I'm going to come to Mark Spence in just a moment. Before I do, I assume you would want a meeting with the Minister to discuss this at the earliest opportunity. Am I right?
Yes, I would like to meet the Minister with the housing associations, with Northern Ireland Water, because I think we need a short-term plan. We all know of the long-term problems with Northern Ireland Water and funding, but we need a short-term plan. I would like to see some priority given because of the housing crisis that we face at the moment. Let's sit down and prioritise these projects that are going to help alleviate the housing crisis. OK. Mark Spence, the Minister said he simply didn't recognise your numbers. I quoted them to him at the start of that interview on Thursday night. Mr O'Dowd was basically saying if NI Water was fully funded, it could connect 4,500 homes. Does that ring true to you?
So we're somewhat surprised by the Minister's comments on Thursday night. The 4,500 figure is a figure we also recognise. That is a figure of connections that could be made in those areas where there is significant investment required if it was fully funded. And actually that figure cannot be achieved at the moment because we're not fully funding NI Water. The larger figure, which is in the public domain, the 19,000 figure, was provided to us by NI Water in April. That actually was a larger figure than we had ascertained by survey of our own members, which came to around 8,500. So NI Water gave us that figure at the same time as they were briefing the department in April with that figure. So the Minister has had those figures for 7 months.
So just to be absolutely clear, that was a figure that you were given by NI Water, which is an arm's length body that the Minister is ultimately responsible for. And when I quoted that figure to him on Thursday night, he said he didn't recognise it.
Indeed.
How do you explain that?
I can't explain that. That figure has been in the public domain, and NI Water, as recently as the last couple of weeks, have steadfastly stuck to that figure. That was quoted again in the Infrastructure Committee by NI Water, so that is clearly a figure NI Water put credence in. The Minister will be well briefed on that figure. That figure is in the public domain, has been for 7 months. It backs up the survey data that our members give us, that we are sitting in a situation where, with 45,000 people on a housing waiting list, we cannot deliver 19,000 homes because there are no connections available.
Let's talk about NI Water's fitness for purpose. What do you make of the Minister's comments on NI Water and how best it should be constituted to get as much money into the system to pay for all of the work that clearly needs to be done?
So let's remind ourselves, NI Water is legally obliged to provide water connections. End of. If you're building a house or a factory or a hospitality business, you are legally entitled to be connected by NI Water. So the fact that NI Water is in breach of that legal responsibility is not a surprise. They have briefed the utility regulator on that. They've briefed the Minister on that. However, we're sitting with a huge waiting list, private rents going through the roof and becoming unaffordable, and factories not being able to be built. And indeed, I was at an event on Thursday night. The Economy Minister spoke in very positive terms around the opportunities for investment in Northern Ireland. At that event, I was approached by an investor who told me that the factory they wanted to build in Newry at a capital cost of £25 million and all of the jobs that would attach to that will be built in Dublin because of the lack of connections to NI Water. Is that a fit-for-purpose public utility delivering connections? It clearly is not. The Minister was keen to reference the NI Audit Office report. With your permission, Mark, I'd like to quote a couple of words from that Audit Office report. The Minister rightly said that they did not say it was not fit for purpose. What they exactly said was that the inherent ineffectiveness of the funding arrangements do not support long-term investment plans. It's inherently ineffective.
The Minister also said in that interview that his department, there was a review a number of years ago, and he says his department hasn't got the time to get involved in another expert-led review. So it's not happening.
And what you've just said, another expert-led review. There has been no expert-led review. There have been 5 internal reviews done by the department for the department, marking their own homework. What the Audit Office have asked for is an expert-led review. We would say that needs to be an independent expert-led review. There can be nothing to fear for our executive. This does not all fall simply on the Infrastructure Minister. The magnitude of the scale here requires the entire executive, and we've had recent meetings with the Communities Minister, Finance Minister, Economy Minister. I'm confident all of our ministers, including John O'Dowd, they're fully aware of the impact of NI Water, but we need a collective decision, and the best way to get that is through an independent expert.
OK, well, the Minister talked during that interview about a 3-pronged approach, working with executive colleagues for better long-term funding, developing policy on sustainable drainage, and finally, developer charges. I wonder if you think that's a credible way forward, and if you would want to discuss his 3-pronged approach and his comments on Thursday night at a meeting with him as soon as possible.
The 3-prong approach, all 3 prongs are perfectly valid. So looking for extra funding from his executive colleagues, yes, of course, we can do that, but which executive minister is going to give up his or her capital budget at this point when all the ministers are facing constraints? The more environmentally friendly SUDS approach, yes, that's something we should have done 20 years ago. We might have reaped the benefits of that today had we done it then. It's certainly a forward-looking proposal. It does nothing to address the existing infrastructure. And finally, the contributions from developers, that is a red herring. The vast cost, as Seamus has already alluded to provide wastewater treatment works will only work where you have a huge number of houses where you can spread that cost, or indeed where you're building houses for the very wealthy. And I'm afraid, I'm sure, again, an unintended consequence of that policy would you're creating a 2-tier water system where only the wealthy can afford to connect. I'm sure that's not the Minister's intention.
OK, I suspect this is a story that's going to run and run, and we're out of time, but it's very interesting to hear your perspectives. Thanks both very much indeed for coming in to join us today. Let's have a final word with Sam Bride. This, Sam, has turned into quite a story in the last few days. Well, it's been running for a long time, but certainly what the Minister said on Thursday night has raised a few eyebrows. What do you make of where we are?
So it's very odd. The Minister sat probably in this chair and said he didn't recognise these figures. One of the figures, as Mark has said, was 19,000. 19,000 was in an NI Water briefing, quite a scary briefing for developers at the start of this summer. We get hold of it in the Belfast Telegraph. We published it months ago. Does the Minister not read the Belfast Telegraph? Does he not read his own briefing material? Does he not read the very extensive media monitoring, which means that when there's a reference to his department, it's put in front of his SPAD or himself? I mean, this is really basic stuff. There's a crisis in NI Water, and the Minister gave the impression that fundamentally most things, if not everything, is well within NI Water. That's simply not true. How could he not know that? I mean, I know that. I'm a journalist. I'm not an expert in NI Water. He's the Minister, and he seems completely ignorant of that, and yet that is killing housing projects.
John O'Dowd, of course, we should point out, is not the housing minister, but we know housing is totemic for Sinn Féin. What is going on when the problem of delays to such badly needed social housing was set out, outlined John O'Dowd? He essentially says it's got nothing to do with Northern Ireland Water.
It's got everything to do with it. This is the biggest issue, I think it's fair to say, in housing right now. If you can't connect your toilet to a sewer, you can't have a house. I mean, it's pretty basic stuff. If you can't connect your tap into the NI water system, you can't have a house. Without this, it doesn't work. We've got a system here where Stormont's failures are catching up with it. So it is flushing. NI water is flushing raw sewage into Lough Neagh. It's then extracting drinking water from Lough Neagh. We know what that has meant for Lough Neagh, and it's increasing the cost of treating the water because the water is dirtier. I mean, it's a cyclical problem here, and yet you've got the minister, because he doesn't want water charges, he's saying all is well, effectively.
Yeah, Seamus Lehane and Mark Spence, very clear there that they were surprised at a lot of what the minister had to say on Thursday night. And to be absolutely honest, there was one point where I was a bit lost for words myself, because I had not been expecting him to take the line that he did. And all of that leads us to the question, is Northern Ireland Water, as it's currently constituted, fit for purpose in your view?
I mean, it's clearly not fit for purpose. You can argue about how it should be structured, but it's not working right now. But the one big idea, if you like, that this minister has is this idea that you have local developers, big developers, whoever they might be, they pay for sewage infrastructure. And that makes sense on one level because it brings in some extra money. You're not going to have water charges, fine, you make somebody pay. The problem is this: you've got a two-tier system, so it's not in any way equal, but you also have this situation that it is water charges by the back door. These are water charges that will be passed on to people buying new homes, but if I live in a £1 million house, which I don't pay. How is that in any way fair or equitable? It's worse than water charges, but because it doesn't tick that box, he seems to be happy with it.
Well, it's a question we will no doubt return to in future. Finally, Sam, looking to the election in the Republic, your paper, The Sunday Independent, has the latest campaign poll which suggests things are tightening for the three parties at the top, and Simon Harris has not had a good weekend.
It's been a stampede of a campaign. It's very, very brief, but it's been very good for Sinn Féin so far. They came into this in a shocking position. Mary Lou McDonald has managed to steady things here. The big question is, where do the votes for this multitude of independents go? If they don't get elected, this is a 1-2-3 system like our assembly system. Where do those transfers go? A lot of those people on the far right, on the ultra-nationalist wing of Irish politics now, they hate Sinn Féin. But do they ultimately come round to see them as more anti-establishment than the others? Maybe they do.
OK, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens between now and polling day on Friday. Sam, thanks very much indeed. That's it for today. I'll be back with the View on Thursday night at the usual time of 10:40 on BBC One and iPlayer. And on next week's Sunday Politics, we have an hour-long programme looking at the fallout from Friday's election. For now, though, from all of us, thanks for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.